on the Shadow Man episode, I discussed how a lot of the platformers and action games of this generation, especially the spotty releases for the Sega Dreamcast, haven't really endured culturally, mostly because their vibes outpaced their mechanics. And once technology advanced, sometimes vibes is not enough. Shadow Man and Elemental Gimmick Gear were both games where I enjoyed existing in their worlds, even if I didn't find it all that edifying to actually, play them. Our next action nominee coming down the pipe is Legacy of KAIN, Soul Reaver. The Legacy of KAIN series began as a game proposal called The Pillars of Nosgoth, drafted by Dennis Dyack, the president of development studio Silicon Knights. While at a conference promoting a PC strategy game known as Dark Legions, Dyack met Lyle Hall, a producer from the company Crystal Dynamics, and they connected on a desire and ambition to build more epic fantasy games with more thoughtful writing and higher production values. Hall had Dyack send him a few proposals they were working on, including one that decades later would become Too Human on the Xbox 360. And Crystal Dynamics made a deal to produce The Pillars of Nosgoth. They spent months weighing the options of which console to produce it for, eventually and luckily settling on the newly announced Sony PlayStation over the Sega Saturn or 3DO. Drawing on influences as disparate as Shakespeare, vampire mythology, and Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, the team debated the narrative accessibility of their protagonist, a vampiric anti-hero known as KAIN. They completed their ambitious script and went about finding an actor that could actually make the material work, and after a thorough search, selected Simon Templeman, a British actor that you may know from his subsequent work on Uncharted.
And here we are again. Another fool's errand.
Or Dragon Age.
Disappointed by the outcome. We must settle things between us.
Or Mass Effect.
If you could retake Earth with a little friendly fire, you'd do it in a heartbeat.
Or from Star Trek, where he met his wife, Rosalind Chow. But his video game voiceover work essentially began here. They had a lengthy production schedule to make sure everything was implemented correctly, promoting the game, now renamed Blood Omen, at both the 1995 and 1996 E3 Game Expos, finally releasing in November of 1996 with a subtitle, Blood Omen, Legacy of KAIN. The game follows KAIN, a murdered nobleman tricked by a necromancer into becoming a vampire to gain revenge on his assassins. His task is to kill the guardians of the 9 Pillars of Nosgoth, who, for various fantasy roleplay reasons, stand in the way of the health of the land and of KAIN's freedom from his curse. The game was acclaimed at the time for its rich dialogue, delivered with zest by Templeman.
I awoke to the pain of a new existence, in a dank womb of darkness and decay.
As well as its fun hack-and-slash dungeon crawler gameplay, while being dinged for its top-down perspective, which I find rather charming in a retro fantasy computer game sort of way, and for the repetitiveness of its combat. The climax of the game finds KAIN, having slain 8 guardians, realizing that he himself is the 9th, and faced with self-sacrifice to restore the world, chooses instead to embrace his vampirism, as the pillars collapse, dooming the world to eternal decay. As we open the sequel, the game's subtitle, Legacy of KAIN, has shifted to its primary title. I guess the blood omen was fulfilled, but KAIN has now built his legacy. Appended with the new subtitle, Soul Reaver, named after the grand sword wielded throughout the series. As Soul Reaver begins, KAIN is now the antagonist, the big bad, the final boss. Nosgoth has been turned to a wasteland thanks to KAIN's actions, as vampires have become the dominant species. KAIN has cast out some of his most powerful lieutenants as a perceived threat to his throne, and the most able among them, Raziel, has been resurrected as a wraith by an ancient and powerful entity known as the Elder God, to combat the tyrant KAIN and bring balance back to the world. Soul Reaver has a very different look and feel than Blood Omen. Crystal Dynamics had begun developing both Soul Reaver and a direct alternate universe sequel called Blood Omen 2 around the same time. Blood Omen 2 was intended to be a more action-oriented game, whereas Soul Reaver was designed more akin to Tomb Raider, with more exploration, puzzle solving, and large open areas players could investigate. The other major reason this game looks so different is because the working relationship between Crystal Dynamics and Silicon Knights had deteriorated and eventually dissolved. Silicon Knights even tried to file an injunction to get production and promotion stopped on the game, which caused delays as Crystal Dynamics sorted out what belonged to Silicon and what belonged to them, pushing the game's release date back for more than a year. But even without this, the team realized they had gotten too ambitious and had to scale back a ton of ideas they brought to the table. Soul Reaver finally dropped on PlayStation and PC in the summer of 1999, with a Dreamcast release trickling out in January of 2000. The game was praised highly for its spooky tone, its interesting visuals, and the complex realm system, as Raziel can shift between the physical and the spectral realm, with each sporting different pros and cons that are essential to solving some of the location-based puzzles, as well as different enemies in the hack-and-slash sections. My personal take here is mostly positive, but with a lot of caveats. Like Shadow Man, this game is mostly platforming and killing dead things, but the combat here is way more fun, because the controls are drastically better, imaginative, responsive, and fun when you get the hang of them. And sprinting through levels, garroting loser zombies, and springing to higher levels is a grand time. Actually, now that I think about it, the game that this reminds me of most, other than in tone, is Elemental Gimmick Gear. A game that was also fun when you got to do lunk-headed combat, and less fun when you had to stop a momentum to solve a series of middling puzzles. A bizarre amount of beloved action games of several generations just involve lengthy sections where you play Boxel in 3D, essentially, just scooting large blocks around for different aims. These parts are a lot less fun, especially when it requires you to shift between the realms, mostly because you can go to the spectral realm with the push of a button, but you have to search and find specific portals while having full health to return to the material plane. Things the game absolutely does not explain to you well, and several of my early hours were just pulling my hair out trying to figure out what to do to get out of the spirit realm. And I have to admit, I restarted this game 4 times, playing from the beginning, because it felt like I had soft-locked myself, like it was the only way I could figure out how to start fresh again. Once you get those things figured out, it's fun. Lead director Amy Hennig likened the series to The Legend of Zelda in its structure and jump from 2D to 3D, and I think that's pretty accurate. If you liked Ocarina of Time in 1998, chances are you would very easily connect with this as well in 1999. It's definitely better than Shadow Man, and it's definitely better than Tomb Raider. Give me about 3 months, we will talk all about my antipathy for the Tomb Raider franchise. And I think I prefer it to Elemental Gimmick Gear, since that game also had immaculate vibes, but this one also has a story that is compelling and mostly clear for all its convolution. The voice acting here is very good, which primarily functions as long conversations between the Elder God, played by the great Tony Jay,
These creatures.
You might recognize them. They are the children of your brother, Duma.
and Raziel, played by Michael Bell, who is a talented and adept voice actor that I unfortunately struggled to take seriously during a lot of this, because he is best known as the voice of Drew Pickles on Rugrats.
That's impossible. These foul-scuttling beasts could not be kin of our high blood.
But he does a good job either way, and like Blood Omen, the cutscenes here are compelling as well. Overall, even with my reservations about their refusal to explain a lot of their cool mechanics, the mechanics themselves are still cool, and the game is still fun. For me, this is unequivocally the best action combat game released on the Dreamcast so far. Way more compelling and responsive than Shadow Man or Expendable, more structurally interesting than EGG or Slave Zero, and much more able to keep its ambitions focused into a concise, playable, not entirely broken game than, say, Sonic Adventure. The team actually bisected a lot of the game they had tried to develop and turned a lot of those ideas into Soul Reaver 2 on the PS2 in 2001. Hilariously, Blood Omen 2 didn't actually get made until 2002, with an entirely new team at Crystal Dynamics. But as for the first Soul Reaver, the Dreamcast port was considered a massive graphical improvement over the PS1, rather than the short walk of something like Fighting Force 2, even if they didn't add a single new feature. Reading reviews, all the praise and all the criticism is pretty fair. It can be frustrating, but it can be fun. And after the first couple hours, I had more fun than I did frustration. And ultimately, Legacy of KAIN Soul Reaver is alright in my book. Next time, Mom, can we get Resident Evil? We have Resident Evil at home, dear. Aw, Mom, but that one sucks.